Thank you for joining me for another video. In the past 4 videos, we've discussed the Genesis creation narrative. That would be the narrative in chapter 1, because there is another creation narrative in chapter 2. Up until now, we've talked about the first 4 days of creation. We discussed before that they're not literal 24-hour day creation days of creation. You know what I'm trying to get at. The words are sort of jumbled in my head, but that's all right. Now, if you believe that they are a literal 24-hour period of time, during which these days are very literal 24-hour days as we understand them today, you're going to be faced with some difficulties, particularly when it comes to defending the biblical narrative. It's much easier and much more straightforward, I think, from the biblical perspective, to say that Yom, in this particular chapter and in the next chapter of Genesis, is not referring to a literal 24-hour day period, but rather just to sort of an undetermined, sort of an ambiguous amount of time. In this case, it would be day in the metaphorical meaning, in the figurative meaning, rather than the literal meaning. So that would be something like, in chapter 2, it tells us that these are the products of the heavens and the earth on the day Hashem created them. Why is it saying the day that he created them? If it took, according to the Genesis narrative, if it took 6 days to create it all, well, because really, and I just explained this to a co-worker of mine this past week, really, something is not completed, or something is not listed as being created until it is completed, until it's finished. So you can, work on a project. Let's say you're restoring an old car. Let's say you've got an old Ford Model T just sort of sitting around. You've been working on it for the last 5 to 10 years or so, whatever the case may be, and today you finish it. Okay, so you could say, today I restored a Ford Model T. Now, you wouldn't say, over the last 10 years or so I've worked on it off and on, and now I've finally completed it. No, you would say, I worked on the car today. I finished the car today. It's just a colloquialism. It's something that we use in everyday speech that we don't really see very often in written accounts, because it's one of those things that in today's fact-oriented world, we just don't place an emphasis on expressions, figures of speech in written form. Why? Because they're figures of speech. You can understand if I tell you, oh yeah, today I made a Ford Model T, or today I restored a Ford Model T. You can understand it. And by the way, if anyone has restored one of those lately, good on you, man. That's pretty cool. Let's get back to the topic at hand, though. So if I were to write, today, on whatever today's date is, I completed I think it's the 15th of June today. On the 15th of June, I restored a Ford Model T. Well, did I really do all the work today? Well, no, but today is the culmination of all the work. Today is when it's finished. Therefore, I'm going to mark today. So you could argue that even if we say these days are literal 24-hour days, it's referring exclusively to the 6 days on which those things were completed. So there's that. But if you were to say that these are literal 24-hour days, and it took God, a 24-hour period to create whatever it says in the Torah that he created on any given day, you're going to have to explain things like why the earth certainly appears, by all scientific standards, to be much older than, let's say, 10,000 years plus 6 days. plus most of a week. And that is how we keep time. In the Jewish world, we count up to the year that it is, plus 6 days. Why? Well, because we're not sure if those are 6 literal days, or if they just happen to be 6 days, completing 6 different epochs of creative work. And that's certainly, in my case, that's certainly what I believe. In your case, you may believe it's a literal 24-hour day, in which case I would love to see how you rationalize that with the scientific data. Please reach out to me, because I legitimately am curious how you do that, because I was actually raised believing that we're talking about 6 literal 24-hour days, and I haven't seen any evidence to back that up other than, well, the Bible says so, therefore it must be true, right? While completely neglecting the fact that Scripture is quite frequently cloaked in metaphoric language. Nobody says God has literal hands and feet, literal nose, things like that, even though the Torah says that God was walking. Isaiah references God's hand. It references his anytime it refers to anger, it says that his nostrils flared. That's just an idiomatic expression. That's just a figure of speech, as we say. But nobody takes that literally, so why should we take day seriously in the creation account? Now, with that being said, we've gone over the first 4 days of creation, the creation of, it just left me, light, of the life-sustaining atmosphere that we enjoy today. Most of us enjoy it today. What was the third day? The seas, the water all gathered into one place. In the God called it sea. He called the land earth, Eretz. And the fourth day was the creation of the sun, moon, and stars, which I discussed last week. Was not a literal, that was the day that he created it. No. That wasn't the day that he literally created it. That was the day that he, or that was the time that he allowed it to be completed, in the sense that you could finally see them from the surface of the planet Earth. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump right back into it. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 1, which at this point, most of you feel like it's probably just dragging on. But this one's actually kind of a cool one. I might even add a few graphics in this video just, for kicks and giggles. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. Probably will. Just a couple anyway. But we'll see how that goes. We're going to be Genesis chapter 1 verses, we're going to read 20 through 23, as is, I guess you could say, my custom. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew, and then I'm going to translate it directly from the Hebrew. So my translation may be slightly different than whatever version of the Bible you're reading. So, that being said, let's jump into it. So it says, Vayomer Elohim, Yishresu Hamayim, Sheres Nefesh Haya, Va'of Ya'ofef al Ha'ares, al Pnei Raqia Hashamayim. ויברא אלוהים את התנינים הגדולים ואת כל נפש החיה הרומסת, sorry, it's the letter Shin, it can be either a S or a Sh, הרומסת, אשר שרסו המים למיניהם ואת כל עוף כנף Leminahu, that's kind of an interesting phrase. Vayar Elohim kitov, vayivarech otham Elohim lemor, pru urvu, umil'u et hamayim bayamim. My eyes are skipping around today. Umil'u et hamayim bayamim. وَأَوْ يَرَّبْ بَأَرِسْ وَهِي عَرَبْ وَهِي بُقَرْ Yom Hamishi. So what it's telling us here is that God said, let the waters swarm, perhaps, we'll say teem in this case, with living creatures, nefesh chaya. These are animate creatures. These are, as opposed to inanimate objects, these are animate creatures. These are critters, right? And fowl that fly over the earth in the firmament of the heavens. I'm trying to be as consistent as I can with my translation of this from previous weeks. So, because the word raqiya, it's kind of a weird word to translate. It means firmament. It's kind of a weird word to translate. And so God created the Tananim Hagedolim, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. God created the Tananim Gedolim and all the living beings that creep, if you will. With which the waters teemed after their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Fantastic. God sat back and was like, yeah, you know what, that's good. I like that. That's cool. And God blessed them being the creations that he made on this day, and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas, and the birds should, how does it translate this word? Increase. That's a good one. It means to make big. Increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. A fifth day as opposed to the fifth day. I think that, as I've mentioned before, it's a little bit telling that it seems to be, well, telling us all those things. Now I'm going to put my notes in front of me, so I'm actually going to keep my glasses on because I have got quite a bit of notes. Now, this takes place during, and by the way, I did kind of chuckle a little bit as I was reading it in the Hebrew, because in modern Hebrew the word "orf" is a chicken. Literally, it means fowl in biblical Hebrew, right? It's the word that's used here, and it says that there were orf. How does it word it? Orf yerofef. Which in my head, I know it means fowl that fly, right? But, in the front of my mind, it comes out being something more along the lines of, and chickens that chick, because, I don't know, there's something wrong with me, maybe, I don't know. I haven't quite figured that out yet. Anyway, so the fifth day of creation, I thought that was funny anyway. The fifth day of creation takes place during the Mesozoic era. So this is going to be around 252 to 66 million years ago, give or take a couple of minutes, depending on is it daylight savings time or not. Now, during the middle period, it's a joke. For those of you just tuning in, that's a joke. That's my idea of humor. During the middle period of the Mesozoic, which would be the Jurassic, remember the movie Jurassic Park, right? Cool stuff, dinosaurs running around, eating people and whatnot. It's exciting, if you were born early enough to see it. And now they've made like 6 movies or so. Good stuff, and interestingly enough, I'm told that at the time Jurassic Park was the most scientifically accurate, based on the evidence that we had at the time. But in the, close to 30 years or so now that it's been out, the original Jurassic Park, that it's been out, we've discovered that almost everything about that is absolutely, completely, 100% wrong. There were no T-Rexes in the Jurassic period. There were no, the Velociraptors did not look like it. No, Velociraptors were like chicken-sized. So I guess theoretically there's nothing to say that they weren't chickens. I guess I don't know. I don't know how they determined that. It's not like they could just take some blood samples for DNA, a saliva sample or something. No, these guys have been dead for like gajillions of years, right? So during the middle period of the Mesozoic, that would be the Jurassic period. The Jurassic period, or epoch. I can't remember how they word it, but the Jurassic. The first archaic birds evolved from a branch of theropod dinosaurs, right? So there are dinosaurs at this time. Fantastic. Everybody likes dinosaurs, right? I don't know a kid, we're not kids anymore, but I don't know anyone my age who was not absolutely mystified by Jurassic Park, who was not absolutely just, blown away by the whole concept of dinosaurs. I don't know anyone who wasn't. If you weren't, you're wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to tell you. Maybe do better. I don't know. So they evolved from a branch of theropod dinosaurs into, I guess, what we could call avian dinosaurs. Avian, of course, being birds. Now, the first true toothless birds, that would be, let's call them modern birds, right? They came onto the scene during the Cretaceous period, which is the final period of the Mesozoic era. So there we have it. We have the creation of avian species, which are birds, as I've already said. At least the earliest species that we can confidently identify as, yeah, this looks like a bird to me. Also, pterosaurs were around at the time, like the pterodactyl. So that's fun. It must have been terrifying for smaller animals that were their prey, but for me it's fun. It's very cool. Giant flying reptiles going about doing whatever it is that reptiles do in the air. I haven't really thought that one through all the way. Presumably catching things and eating them, which goes back to it must have been quite terrifying. Yeah, and so it coincidentally, it happens to be because of the fifth day of creation that people like myself can refer to the sandhill crane, which is in the United States is an endangered species of crane. However, in the state of Florida where I live, they are all over the place. There is no danger of them going extinct unless they just one by one decide to commit suicide by jumping into the highway in front of oncoming vehicles, which they do occasionally. They do, because they are kind of dumb. I mean, they're bird brains. What do you expect, right? But it's because of the fifth day of creation that I can refer to them as pterodactyls based off of what they sound like. And if you've never heard one, but you have seen Jurassic Park, any of the Jurassic Park movies really, think of the pterodactyl sound from that. That's where I'm drawing that from, right? So sandhill crane equals pterodactyl in my mind, right? It also is solely responsible for the Australian government in 1932 losing a war against the dreaded hordes of emus running around in Western Australia. If you know about that event, wonderful. We can be friends. If you don't, go online, look up the Great Emu War. It's hilarious. Makes perfect sense, and I'm sure that it wasn't funny at the time, and it's probably still not so funny in Western Australia. However, to me, living in Florida, it's hilarious because, like, I imagine just a bunch of, soldiers going out into the outback, just shooting these giant flightless birds, which is actually coincidentally exactly what happened. But I'll let you read up on that. So it is kind of a fun period of creation, in my personal opinion. Now, my opinion is right in this case. It is a fun period. But, you're free to disagree, even though you would be wrong. Also a joke. Now, you might be tempted to think that fish, what about fish? The Torah, it tells us here that God wanted the waters to teem with life. right? So therefore, we're talking about fish, right? Well, no, as it turns out, no. If you thought that, you would be incorrect, because fish have actually already been on the scene. And I believe I mentioned this before, since the Cambrian period, which is the Torah's third day of creation. So that's kind of cool. But that being said, what does that mean for what the Torah is trying to tell us? What is the Torah trying to tell us about the waters teeming with life? So verse 21 tells us that it's a group of animals that are collectively called the Tananim Gedolim, which I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about, and we are, because it's a fun group, right? I understand it to be just sort of a passing reference to, I can't think of a better way to say this, let's say sea monsters, right? These giant aquatic reptiles, dinosaurs, if you will. Although technically speaking, dinosaurs only refers to like one clade of these ancient giant reptilian beasts. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that dinosaurs were actually on land. And if we're talking about the water, what's in the water, which we are, because that's exactly what the Torah specifically says, we're going to be talking about things like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and other scary things like that. I believe, actually, in some of the later Jurassic Park videos, you can actually see mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. So that's cool. I haven't seen those yet. I've only seen the first three. But I have got it on one of those streaming platforms. I should go ahead and check that out later. Just because why not, right? Now, yeah, so technically mesiosaurs and plesiosaurs, they're not really, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, they're not technically dinosaurs, because there is kind of a distinction there. But most people don't get that distinction. Most people don't use that distinction. They don't understand that distinction, and that's okay. They just kind of collectively call them all dinosaurs, and that's fine. I do it too, right? So, and I know better, so whatever. They're dinosaurs. They're cool, right? Jurassic Park, yay. Now, the Tananim Gedolim, right, that the Torah mentions being on day 5, they are a fun category of animals, because here's the catch, right? We know what they are. Okay, we know good and well what they are. These are, I believe, the King James translates them as giant whales or great whales or something along those lines. Other translations, and I bring up the King James specifically because there are a lot of, most of my viewer base is Christian, and I thank you for that. It does mean a lot to me. But most Christians, are familiar and generally revere the King James Version of the Bible, which is fine. I have nothing wrong with that. No issues there, right? Other versions will call them like great. I saw one time. I think it might have been the New International Version. They called them like the great sea monsters or sea dragons or something like that. And that sounds just as crazy as me earlier when I called them sea monsters, right? But let's be honest here, that's what we're talking about, okay? So we know what they are, but nobody really wants to talk about it because of what it implies, right? So these are giant aquatic reptiles who scientifically are extinct, right? At least we assume them to be extinct. Science has shown no evidence that they're still around today. However, we still have stories of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, the Lake Champlain Monster, Champ, as it's colloquially known, and other similar occurrences all around the world of these lake monsters, right? But these stories had to come from somewhere. And we have stories in ancient cultures, like the Jewish culture. Israelite culture is, it's literally all over the Tanakh. There are literally references to the Tananim Gedolim all over the Tanakh, in the Torah in the prophets. Isaiah makes mention of them several times. The book of Job is filled with references to them. The Psalms have several references to it, right? So they're all over the place in the Hebrew Bible, right? You don't find them, interestingly. I think this is kind of just, I mean, it makes sense to me, but it is sort of interesting. You don't find them in the Christian Bible. Not even a passing reference to them. At least in the Jewish Bible, it's like, oh yeah, and God beat up the dinosaurs, for paraphrasing sake, but you don't find that anywhere in the Christian Bible, and I think that's actually kind of sad, because it adds a whole new dimension of, wait, what, to the text. Anyway, I'm way off of my notes here. Now, technically, yes, I suppose it is technically possible that some of these species could still exist today, right? Assuming that Nessie and Champ are, just sort of, something just knocked on my window. Assuming that Nessie and Champ are really just sort of, figments of people's imagination, which is what most people assume. Most of the more educated people anyway. But it is technically possible, I suppose, that some of these animals do still exist, but they would have to be in the very deep parts of the ocean, places that we haven't been yet, places that we can't even send probes yet. And they would basically just kind of have to stay there. And they would have to, really just sort of avoid all contact with humanity. Like we're the plague, and we may very well be to them. I don't know. I haven't asked them. But we have no scientific evidence to back it up that they're still around, so let's go with scientific consensus on this, that they are most certainly extinct, right? So if they're extinct, and science tells us they've been extinct for, let's say, 66-ish million years, dating back, to long before humanity was on the scene. Okay, so now we have a problem, because now there's something implied in the fact that we all have stories about these animals. And the implication is we saw one at some point in history. I'm not going to tell you what to believe about that, but I will tell you that there are a couple of plausible hypotheses, which sounds very scientific, because it is. So probably the most probable likelihood, the most probable hypothesis for why we have stories of this in ancient cultures, even in modern cultures, the Loch Ness Monster, Lake Champlain Monster. Why do we have these stories? Why do they still persist? Well, in addition to the fact that it's kind of a primordial fear of humanity, and the fact that dinosaurs are cool. I mean, how many 40-year-old people hate dinosaurs? Nobody. Kids, okay, they're a different story. Older than 40, I don't know. I'm not older than 40, right? But, people my age, yeah, man, dinosaurs are cool. Still cool. To this day, I was telling my kids about dinosaurs the other day, and they love them. Probably because they see I like them too, right? So, aside from the fact that they're cool, and aside from the fact that it is sort of a primal fear, that we would go swimming or even just sort of wade out into the water and this giant otherworldly lake monster or sea monster or something would come up and just straight devour us. Aside from that, it's highly likely, I would say, that at some point in antiquity, before recorded history, if you will, that some might even say prehistory, that the carcass of one of these animals washed up on shore. And some ancient human, or perhaps our evolutionary predecessor, I don't know, saw the carcass and told stories, right? Told stories about its size, told stories about its the great might that it must have had, described it very well. You read the book of Job. I mean, we're talking. It's got definition of it having scales and how do you call it? Like large nostrils and just sort of this monstrous appearance, right? And frankly, I think that any of us who sees it would absolutely agree, yes, that is without a doubt a sea monster. But they've been extinct for so long, So the implication is that at some point in human history, somebody saw it and told somebody who told somebody who told somebody, and eventually over time, the stories were embellished, and they just sort of became part of cultural folklores around the world, right? You look in the Americas, some of the ancient peoples of the Americas have stories of sea monsters, sea serpents, dragons. Middle Eastern cultures are filled, and we're going to look at some of them here in a minute, are filled with references to these legendary beings, right? Let's see if I can find where I'm supposed to be. Yeah, they are mentioned quite a few times in the Tanakh. So yeah, this is just kind of a fun thought. We didn't know for sure that they existed until we discovered fossils within the last few hundred years. So that's kind of a cool thought that it's in the Bible before we discovered fossils. Before we had evidence that it existed, people already believed that they were real. And when I say it's in the Bible, I'm not just referring to Jewish scripture. No, I'm referring to the scriptures of I guess not scriptures, but the religious writings of cultures all over the Middle East. People who are closely connected to the Israelite people in antiquity, those who predate us, and those who come after us, and those who are contemporary, for that matter. But we didn't really have evidence for them. So the question logically is, well, how did the stories get started? Well, the logical answer is somebody at one point saw a carcass. It's the only thing that makes any sense. So we're going to very quickly look at some of these ancient legendary creatures, and I would go so far as to call them legendary rather than mythical, because mythical implies that they're not real. Legendary implies that there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere. It may not all be literal truth. It may be, figurative truth. But the fact remains that, yes, absolutely, these creatures existed. We have ample evidence for it. By the way, if you have kids, you should take them to go see dinosaur bones at the museums or wherever it is you have near you. They'll love it. If you're anywhere near like me in personality, you'll love it. And let's be honest, it's fun family time, right? And we could really use a lot more of that in the world today. So now we already know that the Tananim Gedolim are legendary creatures in Israelite folklore. And now collectively we call them Tananim Gedolim. Now in modern Hebrew that means like giant crocodiles, right? Really kind of anticlimactic there. But in ancient times, it appears to have meant more. The word tanin in modern Hebrew is a crocodile, but it's it's a scaly beast, so I imagine a crocodile would fit that, but just because we call them crocodiles doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it really was originally, right? Languages evolve over time. Now it appears that the Leviathan, the Leviathan, for those of you who don't understand the Hebrew there, was one of the species that the ancients identified and actually gave a name. Perhaps Tananim was just kind of the general broad family of animals, let's call them. Like we have mammals. Well, so maybe, the sea monsters were just all collectively called Tananim Gedolim or Taninim. And over time, we just sort of adapted that word to, refer to things that we could see, things that were, without a doubt, for real there. In this case, the Leviathan appears to have been one of the Taninim. The Leviathan and the Taninim are both mentioned together in Isaiah 27, verse 1. Now, what's interesting, though, is Isaiah 51, verse 9 mentions a different sea monster in connection with the Taninim called the Rahav. So the Rahav is apparently a let's call it a different species of Tanin. I think that's kind of a cool thought, that they were familiar with multiple types of, let's call them dinosaurs for convention's sake. Now, the Babylonian goddess Tiamat also appears to have been a sea monster of sorts, as does the Assyrian Labu. The Tananim also appear in Ugaritic writings as the Tunanu, in Aramaic writings as Tanina, Akkadian writings as Danina, and in late Arabic writings as Tanin. Now, it appears that the Arabic form is actually directly from the Akkadian form, so it looks like perhaps the Arabs did not inherit the legends about these Taninim. I'm using the Hebrew Taninim because that's familiar to me, which is the plural of Tanin. So it may very well be that the Arabs didn't originally have a legend about them, but they just sort of adopted it as they expanded out. Interestingly enough, in some of these cultures, they're described as being like multiple-headed sea serpents or dragons, that sort of thing. In the biblical account, all that we're really sure about is that they're scaly, they live in the water, they churn the water, where they are. There are mentions in the book of Job of like flashes of lightning, if you will, so that implies sort of a fire-breathing ability. I don't understand how that would come into play in water, but perhaps that's just part of the Semitic embellishment there. Perhaps that's just sort of a poetic way of just saying these guys are really, really scary. Because that's actually what the passages in Job are saying. Dude, these guys are scary. You will not believe this. And my inner Donald Trump voice is, they're huge. They're huge. They're just, how would he say it? Something like the biggest, the scariest. Believe me, everybody knows. Believe me. That sort of a thing. That's just on repeat in my head now. Now, there are a number of other Middle Eastern deities, like perhaps Apep in Egypt. There would be Apophis, who are probably also part of this general, broader, legendary material about the Tananim Gedolim. It appears to have been a sort of a pan-Middle Eastern cultural legend. And just to throw this out there, you also see the same thing in Greek mythology, where Zeus slays, I forget what it's called in Greek mythology, but he kills one in the sea. Thor in Norse mythology, Thor goes up against Jormungandr, the world serpent, which is just exciting to me. Makes it sound really cool, and I'm sure it sounded really cool to them too. But So it's not and also again you see it in the indigenous peoples of the Americas. I would wager you're probably going to find it among um, indigenous people groups all around the world, because again, if in ancient times the carcass of one of these aquatic dinosaurs, a mosasaur or a plesiosaur or something, washed up on shore, and some ancient human saw it, he was going to tell everybody he knew. How do I know this? Because that's what I would do. People really haven't changed very much. So, in addition to the avian animals, the dinosaurs, which by the way were there at this time, the Tananim Gedolim, there were also small mammals that evolved during this time, right? This is the birth of Rodentia, right? The first mammals on Earth were like rodent-sized things, mice. What's the one? The capybara, which just looks like a dry, tailless beaver. I think beavers are also rodents. I can't recall though. So they would have been evolving during this time as well. Perhaps not the exact species that I mentioned, but for sure their ancestors, their predecessors, would have been evolving during this time as well. So this is the very first mammals, or mammaliforms, the very first what we can recognize as being mammals. They were warm-blooded, which is nothing really particularly exciting combined with their size, right? Warm-blooded, smaller, nothing exciting, right? They evolved from cynodonts, which doesn't really mean anything to us unless, you're into that sort of thing. I just thought it was kind of a cool little bit of information in light of the fact that mammals give birth to live young, but cynodonts give birth to, they don't give birth, but they lay eggs. So I think that's really just kind of an interesting thing. Platypus, mammal that lays eggs. I believe the echidna does as well. There are only I think 5 species worldwide of mammal that still lay eggs. Cynodonts, clearly, or at least their descendants, right? The end of the Mesozoic, the end of the Mesozoic era is marked by the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which happened around 66 million years ago and caused the mass extinction of at least 75% of all animal and plant species, which included all non-avian dinosaurs, right? Most animals that are larger than about 25 kilograms or so, that's right around, let's say, 55-ish pounds, they would have been wiped out. That's on land. Now in water, yes, most of the animals that were in there, most of the different species that were in the water, they also died out. However, there were some that actually survived, giant sea turtles, things like that, right? Very cool stuff. Now this event was caused by the impact of an asteroid that was some 10 to 15 kilometers wide, right? We're talking, let's say, 6 to 9-ish miles wide. Kind of a big thing, kind of a big rock to be flying out of the air. But it's hypothesized that the impact point is in the Chicxulub crater in Mexico. It actually happens to be just off the coast of the Yucatan. So there we have it. A lot of information that we covered. I am pretty much done with this video. Now, one of the things that I did want to get into that's not in my notes is we see in the text of the creation account in Genesis 1, obviously, that God never outright creates something. I mean, he does, but he doesn't. And what I mean by that, and by that, I'm just let me explain what I mean there, because it is kind of weird. And if it were in my notes, it would have been much more polished than this. But so When God creates life on earth, plant life, animal life, it doesn't matter what. One of the things that's interesting about it is he doesn't say, let there be plants. He doesn't say, let there be bugs. And that's how you know that God does not like bugs. I'm joking. He probably doesn't, though. But I mean, let's be for real here. Okay, what are humans compared to the Almighty? Right? I mean, we're like ants. We're like nothing to him. And yet, for some strange reason, he likes us. I haven't figured that one out yet. I'm not arguing with it. I'm not saying that I don't like it. I just haven't figured it out yet. I don't understand it. There's a great love that God has for humanity. But he doesn't say, let there be plants, let there be Tananim Gedolim. He doesn't say, let there be man. He doesn't say, let there be chimpanzees. What he does say is, let the earth produce vegetation. Back to day 3. Let the earth produce vegetation. Here he says, let the waters teem. Let the waters produce these swarms of schools of aquatic animals. Let the fowl fly in the air. My kids are at the pool. It sounds like they're trying to come in though, so I got to be quick. He says, let the fowl fly in the air. Well, the assumption there is that fowl, birds, fly, right? Well, but before that point, they didn't. There was a point in history when birds did not fly. That's just, when I found this out for the first time, when my rabbi showed me this, it absolutely blew my mind. I was just like, are you serious? I mean, how did that happen? So what we're seeing here is the birth of flight, powered flight, self-powered flight, right? We're seeing the water produces these creatures. The earth itself produces vegetation. The animals are produced in day 6. The earth produces these different animal species. What we're dealing with here is not a creation ex nihilo of something from nothing, as they say. It's not a which coincidentally is what ex nihilo means, something from nothing. We're not dealing with the creation of God just says, let it be, and boom, it was. He set in place the building blocks for everything, and then after the building blocks were in place, he said, okay, now I'm going to release the restrictions a little bit and let the earth produce vegetation. Let the waters produce fish, taninim gedolim, let the birds, let the avians fly. Let them learn the power of flight. So we can see that God's creation does not have to be, one-on-one, okay, let's form this specifically the way that it is. No, God set in place laws for evolution, set in place laws for how a species could change over time, and what factors influenced that until eventually it was good. So that's all I got for today. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Make sure you turn the notifications on so you get updates every time I produce a new video. If you haven't found me yet on Facebook, go ahead and do that. Go find me. All you got to do is search for an unorthodox Jew. You'll find me. I should be like the first one that pops up. At least I am every time I look. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can ask questions in the comments on this video, or you can, if you so desire, you can reach out to me on Facebook. That being said, I am done. And until next time, shalom.